Well, here we are, yet again. I'm sure it's sounding all too familiar now. We were here to discuss the massacre in Paris 8 months ago and the bloodbath in Brussels 3 months ago. At this point, I could probably even create a playlist for videos and streams that were made in the wake of Islamic terror attacks. But I'm slowly reaching a point where I find it difficult to say anything that has not been said already. I feel like I'm repeating myself, voicing the same arguments differently, in the hope that maybe this time they will finally sink in. But even though I might be recycling my messages, I feel like these videos have to be made because these topics need to be discussed. And every single time when something like this happens, we have to discuss it all over again. I started preparing this video at 7:50 in the morning. Normally I still would have been in my bed, but I could not sleep last night as I was too busy watching the emergency broadcasts on television. I know around this time the world is finally waking up to the news that France yet again has been the victim of an Islamic terror attack. And I'm awaiting the reactions of politicians worldwide so I can start turving their vapid cookie-cutter statements. We're probably going to hear a lot about how love beats hate and how it's important we stay unified in these hard times. Oh yes, they are going to express their condolences and color all landmarks and building with the tricolor. Later in the evening, I expect the first nothing to do with Islam messages to finally enter the political discussion. And from that point on, we're pretty much going to see the exact same inappropriate and toxic apologetics that have polluted the debates we so desperately tried to hold after the first Paris attack and the attacks in Brussels. For now, let's just start with what we know, shall we? Yesterday, the 14th of July, was a holiday in France. On that day, the French celebrate the storming of the Bastille, a Parisian-based prison. The event is nowadays considered by many historians as the start of the French Revolution. And you probably understand how much symbolic meaning the French Revolution, and with that this holiday, carries amongst the people of France. Well, you're not the only one who understands that symbolism. Yesterday at 10:30 in the evening, a fireworks show in Nice, the southeast of France, came to an end. People on the Promenade des Anglais Boulevard were getting ready to leave as a truck appeared out of nowhere, driving at high speed. The truck crashed into a mass of people and managed to drive through for an additional 2 kilometers. Eyewitnesses and survivors also report that the driver started shooting and altogether managed to kill 87 people, a number that is most likely going to rise as many others are wounded, amongst whom are 50 children. All we know about the terrorist is that he was a Frenchman who was born in Tunisia and that he got killed by the police on the scene. When I found out about this, I was in a Skype call with Dr. Lehman, and one of the first things I wondered was whether or not I'd have the backbone to log off Twitter, simply because I couldn't be bothered sitting through the tsunami of disgusting apologetics that tends to follow after events like this. And if you follow me on Twitter, you most likely know I utterly failed. I spent hours going on angry tirades, debating with politically correct nutjobs, obviously achieving nothing. There were several types of reactions that annoyed me. The first one being the nothing to do with Islam crowd that arrived on the scene faster than the ambulances did. The bodies of the victims weren't even cold yet, and they were already trembling over them as they rallied to the defense of the religion of peace. I'm honestly baffled to see some people are still keeping up this nonsense. If a white nationalist says he is killing black people to start a race war, everyone accepts that as his motive. But if a Muslim commits an act of terror in the name of Islam, it seems like no one accepts it. Oh, but these are not real Muslims. Islam is a religion of peace. These people are just fooled into thinking this is what Islam is. Honestly, I yet have to encounter the first person who says the Westboro Baptist Church consists out of people who were fooled into thinking they were actual Christians. Christianity is a religion of peace, and only Christianophobes would think otherwise. Look, I know you Islam apologists think you have the moral high ground here, but what you're actually doing is really condescending. For some reason, your Western arrogance brought you in a position where you thought you were actually in a better position to explain the motives of these jihadists rather than the actual jihadists themselves. Oh, listen to me, person who dedicates their life to their religion, for I live in the West, and although I have not read the Quran and you have, I've seen enough Tumblr memes to know your religion is one of peace and tolerance. So when you say you are waging a holy war in the name of Allah the Merciful, you are actually wrong. How arrogant and self-centered one must be to think like that. How arrogant to think everything that goes wrong in the Middle East goes wrong because of us, as if no one could ever do anything independently from the West. You do realize that ISIS quotes the Quran as they stone gays, rape women, enslave children, behead journalists, and carry out acts of terror. They have a suitable passage for just about every atrocity they commit. And if they are not real Muslims and have nothing to do with Islam, then I guess the Crusaders weren't real Christians, and the Crusades had nothing to do with Christianity. I mean, if you bullshit me, at least bullshit me consistently. I mean, I was talking to Fiffen yesterday, and he said that people were defending Islam on social media before it was even discovered that the terrorist was a Muslim. And that says a lot, doesn't it? The fact that people make the connection between an act of terror and Islam before we even know who the terrorist was says a lot about this religion that people are so desperately trying to defend. If Islam has nothing to do with terrorism, then how do you connect terrorism to Islam before the authorities have even acknowledged that that connection existed? Another type of tweet that just really got under my skin was the not all tweet, where people nagged about generalization as if even entertaining the thought Islam was the root cause of this attack was the same as blaming all Muslims. I mean, in all my life, and maybe it's because I'm only 20, but in all my life, and with all the people I've met, I've never met a single idiot who literally claims all Muslims are terrorists. Not even the biggest racist I've spoken to claim that all Muslims are terrorists. Even they admit that it's not all. But literally every time I tweeted about how Islam has its problems that need to be discussed, I got messages from people calling me a racist, saying I was calling all Muslims terrorists. It's ironical how these people think they are the ones defending Islam, standing up for the moderate Muslim. But what they're actually doing is letting the moderates down by refusing to criticize the extremists. Instead of empowering the reformers, they call them Islamophobes and downplay their concerns, saying true Islam is peaceful and needs no reform. And because these people, of which many are politicians and dignitaries, refuse to discuss radical Islam, they create the right conditions for generalizations. Because if you don't take the bad apples out of the crate, eventually people will get pissed off and throw the entire crate out. Another thing that annoyed me on social media yesterday were the soft OMG, literally crying right now, you guys, pray for Nice type of nonsense that Twitter was literally filled with. Instead of discussing the severity of the issue and potential solutions, the conversation on Twitter was led by virtue-signaling valley girls and inspirational Tumblr swag fags. For some reason, people's way of dealing with this atrocity is going in fetal position in some corner in a dark room where they can pray, put a tricolore overlay on their Facebook avatar, and tweet on hashtags such as Pray for Nice and Je suis Nice. And don't get me wrong, I understand people want to show their allegiance. They're probably frustrated and saddened just like you and me are. And they want to do something to show how upset they are about this. I mean, I believe most of us had the tricolor overlay on our Facebook photos after the Paris massacre 8 months ago. It's just that it's becoming rather cheap now. Whereas it all started off as a well-intended way to show the French were all with them, it now became a substitute for taking action. All the nice words and je suis hashtags are not met with actions and are more often mentioned in the same sentence as nothing to do with Islam. And it's things like that that leave a nasty taste in your mouth. Europeans and Americans are laying on their backs, virtue signaling their way through problems while not contributing to the solution, and going back to their original Facebook photos after a week or two. Although I have to admit something stems me slightly hopeful. And that is that most progressive nonsense was posted by teenagers between the ages of 12 and 16, and I saw an increasing amount of people on the relevant hashtags acknowledging what the real cause of this attack was. All I can do is hope that our leaders will do the same. They'll have to, or they will lose the support of the people. Elections are coming up in many European countries, and if people do not feel represented anymore by the mainstream parties, it is inevitable that right-wing populists will come to power. And I don't think anyone wants the Golden Dawn movement, or le Front National. And I'm not saying that there is an easy solution to all of this. I mean, on one hand, you have ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and on the other hand, Muslims that live here and sympathize with the movement, and are even willing to commit acts of terror in their name. And that is something you cannot stop with carpet bombing jihadists in Syria. I mean, you can stop the influx of refugees, which would be a good starter. But there are people born and raised in the West that somehow still radicalize, like Salah Abdeslam. I don't think we can solve this problem, ever, if we don't start acknowledging that it's Islam